Well, hello again, guys, from here at Whitley Park, where you can hear, well, I can hear, maybe you can't, the sound of footballs being smashed behind the trees there. Newcastle preparing for tomorrow's trip down to Brighton. Now, there's a lot to get through. We've been speaking to Eddie Howe for the first time in a fortnight inside there, but I'm going to kick off with the injury news. There's a lot to bring you in. I want to talk as well about Yuan Wissa. This was news I brought you exclusively in my Newcastle Confidential column yesterday. After all the talk of ACL injuries and the amount of messages I received saying, Craig, has he done his ACL? Is he out for the season? There seems to be worrying noises around this, the return date being pushed back as it was a couple of weeks ago. Can you do some digging? Can you bring us the truth? Well, I think I have, and it is that Yuan Wissa has damaged his posterior cruciate ligament. That's his PCL, if we want to use the correct medical abbreviation. Eddie Howe has just confirmed that inside with us. I spoke about this in my column yesterday. Now, the PCL, of course, there's the ACL and the MCL as well. The ACL is the most serious in terms of the length of time it keeps you out. The PCL is more positive in terms of that initial diagnosis and the time which you are going to be on the sidelines. That remains the case. Now, it has been pushed back slightly. We were expecting to see Yuan Wissa towards the end of October. That now has gone into the start of November. And my understanding is that it's not West Ham in the first week in November, but rather the soft target, more likely, is Brentford, back in his former club the week after on November the 9th. While the injury isn't deemed a serious knee injury that requires surgery and a 9, 10, 12-month absence, as we've seen with a lot of previous players, this one does still require the swelling to go down. So it needs the eye test. Yes, you've got the scan results that reveal no serious damage, and if all goes according to plan, Yuan Wissa will be back playing in early November, but he still needs the knee to hold up and for the swelling to subside. He is back out running and working on the grass, and from what we hear, the knee has responded well. But until they come closer to that date, we just won't know. And I think that's why there was the caution from Eddie Howe a couple of weeks ago. But what I can allay are the fears that he has damaged his ACL. Now, I've spoken to some experts who believe that damaging your ACL sometimes it can be better long-term because you're operated on, it's repaired, and players who have that knee surgery invariably report coming back and feeling stronger. There's a little bit more doubt with the PCL, so until we see Yuan Wissa back playing, we won't know exactly where he's at in terms of strength. But so far, the noises are positive. He's feeling a lot better in himself physically, and there's absolutely that mental determination. He realises that he came in on deadline day and within 10 days had injured himself without even training with his teammates. He is absolutely focused on getting back for Newcastle United and scoring goals and sharing that load with Nick Voltemade. What then does that mean for his participation at AFCON? Because if you look at the dates, and he does return on November the 9th, well, a little over 4 weeks later, he might have to go out to Morocco to represent Congo at the AFCON. Now, will that happen? It was a question put to Eddie Howe this morning, and quite skillfully and expectedly, Eddie Howe said, no, let's just concentrate on getting him back. But I will tell you what I've heard and what my understanding is. I had assumed, like everybody else, that Yuan Wissa would go to AFCON, that you would see him for 3, 4, 5 weeks at best at Newcastle, and then that would be him off. I'm not now entirely convinced that will be the case. Now, do Newcastle have the power just to pull him out and say, no, you're not going? No, I don't think they do. But I think what there needs to be here are some grown-up conversations and a compromise as well, because there's every chance at the end of this season, Congo are going to have a World Cup to look forward to. What is best for Yuan Wissa? Is it best that after only being back a few weeks that he does go out to AFCON and perhaps plays on pitches not up to the standard of Premier League, training on pitches as well that aren't really at that required standard? We saw him go out in the injury he suffered playing out in Africa. It was you look back at the video, a strange stumble where his knee almost just collapses beneath him as he's running free. Newcastle will absolutely and understandably want to keep him here during the early weeks and during the important stages of that recovery and that rehabilitation, and monitor how much he trains, how much he plays. If he goes off to AFCON, they'll lose that. And by extension, what I've just said, the danger would be Congo could then lose him for the World Cup next summer. So I think some grown-up conversations are going to be had. They need to be had, and it's not the absolute given that if Yuan Wissa's fit, he goes to AFCON. Now, if he does stay here, and it is 4, 5, 6 weeks extra Newcastle get out of him, that is almost payback for the time he's missed at the start of the season. So it's one to watch on that. It's a developing situation, but the most important development for now is that Yuan Wissa's knee does hold up. He does come through the next 2 or 3 weeks without any scares or any setbacks, and he then returns to play in that week of West Ham, Bilbao and Brentford. And wow, what a return it would be if it was down at his former club. Now, as for other injury news, this again was something I brought you in the column yesterday, and it's good news as well on Lewis Hall. Lewis Hall will, if everything goes according to plan, be back playing this side of the November international break. Now, Lewis Hall's initial scan said 6 to 8 weeks from the point of the injury, so it's not massively different from that if you take 6 weeks from the injury being suffered out in Belgium on October the 1st, but a second scan was even better news, and they've shaved a couple of weeks off that. So Lewis Hall, he could be back playing. Eddie Howe's just confirmed that with us inside. He said he didn't know exactly when, but that is positive, especially given Tino Livramento will be out until the other side of the November international break with his knee injury. Just a whistle through the others. Jacob Ramsey back in the squad tomorrow down at Brighton. Joe Linton, there was a groin scare when he was away with Brazil. He's fine. Will he and Bruno play, given all of the travel they've had? They actually flew out to South Korea and had to turn back to Amsterdam. So they will be jaded. I wouldn't be surprised if he did rotate the midfield tomorrow, especially if Ramsey's proved his fitness during the past couple of weeks. Louis Miley, the information is he should be okay, but there was also an injury scare for him during the international break. Sandro Tonali, perhaps the most important of all, he's come back okay, but he had a little bit of an injury scare coming out of the Nottingham Forest game as well. I think there was some post-match swelling. So yeah, it's the walking wounded in midfield tomorrow, but collectively, there's no injuries there. It seems as if he's got the full complement of players back. And Joe Willock, he's found his way out of that maze. Yeah, he was never lost in the maze, of course. I don't know if you've seen this, the story that went viral during the international break. Eddie Howe said he did have to speak to Joe Willock about it just to make sure it wasn't true, which was a lighter moment of this morning's press conference. So all the midfielders are there. It'll be fascinating to see what he does with regards to that selection tomorrow. Personally, I would just put Tonali in there at number 6 and then pick the others around it, depending on how they're looking and how they're feeling. Other injuries. Will Asula is carrying a little bit of an ankle problem. Now, Eddie said he is fit, and when he goes on the pitch, he will be okay. And Asula needs to be fit, really, because Nick Voltemada, as well as he's done, it's a big ask to continue to ask him to carry that load from minute 1 to minute 90. He's been away with Germany and played 2 games as well. So Asula being available is important. And I honestly think the last couple, when Asula's come on, he has looked like an improved, better player on last year. Of course, he was ready to go out on deadline day to Frankfurt. No one is denying that it would have happened if not for PIF stepping in and saying, no, the terms of the deal being changed. It no longer benefited Newcastle. And wow, what a stroke of good fortune that was, given what happened less than a week later with Yuan Wissa. So Asula will be on the bench tomorrow. Nick Voltemada's come back, no problems at all. Again, I'm picking the team here. Put Botman and Chow at the back as the 2 centre-halves. I asked Eddie Howe about them. I'll get to that in a second this morning. Tonali in the middle, then Voltemada up front. That's the spine, and then work around that. Now, Chow and Botman as well. 2 players I think we've got to mention, because we started the season looking at Newcastle and thinking, Dan Burn and Fabian Schär probably going to kick on and be the 2 centre-halves for certainly during the early part of the season. Now, already Chow and Botman have come in. I asked Eddie Howe this morning, you're a former centre-half. How do they compare to you? And he laughed. He said you just cannot compare the 2 of them. They've got everything, and just from nowhere now. I say it from nowhere. Sven Botman's been at the club a long time, and Malik Chow coming in the summer. But the succession plan we saw in terms of those 2 centre-halves has arrived sooner than perhaps we thought, and they're just incredible. You look around the Premier League for centre-back pairings, and there's a 2 so far. And they've come up against big tests. They've played against top teams. They complement each other so well. And Eddie Howe said that inside there with us this morning. And the irony is, we talk about all these players going away on international duty and coming back, are they okay? Sven Botman and Malik Chow were training behind the trees there during the entirety of the past 2 weeks. So look at Holland and Germany's defences. It must be tremendous if those 2 cannot force their way in. But Eddie Howe said he expects in time there to get the international recognition that they absolutely deserve. Now, I was away with England this week. Anthony Gordon as well. His performance out in Latvia. It was timely to produce his best yet in 16 appearances for England, because honestly, with England so far, he had a great half out in Ireland. I thought he had little flashes. The 4 minutes he played at the Euros when he was fantastic and full of intent and energy, and should have got far more than he did 2 summers ago. Well, Anthony Gordon on Tuesday night out in Riga, he was very good. Easily his best yet for England. And the goal he scored was a goal I think he should score more often for Newcastle. driving down the left, cutting in on his right and finding the bottom corner, almost replicating the Harvey Barnes trademark move. Gordon's got that in him. He should do it more, and I think he would have come back in a good place, because what he will know now is, returning from 2 starts with England, that he's in possession of that jersey, and England matters. It means a lot to Anthony Gordon. So I think now he comes back with a real spring in his step, and even though he's had that travelling and that involvement, he should be another one who was one of the very first names on the team sheet for where he is, because the wingers haven't contributed this season. It really is quite amazing that Nick Voltemada came in and was meant to be afforded this period of adaptation while others around him performed and helped him out. They haven't really helped him. The wingers haven't chipped in with the goals they should have done. They haven't created the chances for him. Even the midfield, I think, can do more. So Voltemada to come in and carry it with 4 goals and 5 starts. I've spoken about this a lot. Shows tremendous character and personality. So if you're picking the team for tomorrow, which it seems as if we're falling into, you'd have Gordon on the left, Voltemada through the middle. Down the right, well, Anthony Elanga remains a concern. Didn't have a good international break either. Elanga needs to step up. I know Ross Wilson, the sporting director's come in. We're going to talk about him in just a second. Knows Elanga well from Nottingham Forest. I would expect he might even get involved with that and have a conversation to try to discover what it is that is holding Elanga back at the moment. He doesn't seem to be playing with a freedom or a belief or confidence. So Elanga would be a concern. That might mean that Jacob Murphy starts on the right. The midfield we've already spoken about. The 2 centre-halves pick themselves at full-back. Dan Burl went on continue at left-back, even given Lewis Hall and Livramento remain out. And at right-back, well, that will most likely be Kieran Trippier, a player who has, again, spent the last couple of weeks here with Nick Pope in goal. And that should be an 11 who was good enough to go and not get beat at Brighton. Now, I would never really commit to Newcastle going and winning there, just because it hasn't been a very happy place to go during the last couple of seasons. I've been there for most of those games. I remember 2 seasons ago at the start of the season was one of the worst performances. The midfield especially had the best midfield 3 on the pitch that day. Joe Linton, Tonali and Bruno. It didn't work at all, and my doubts for tomorrow would be around the midfield, given the travel of Tonali, of Bruno, Joe Linton, a little scare with Joe Linton, of Miley as well, so that would be my worry, why I wouldn't necessarily commit to Newcastle going to Brighton and winning tomorrow. But the team I named there, primarily based on the confidence I've got around those at the back, would suggest they might go there and should not get beat. What does that mean? Guys, I'm afraid it probably means 0-0. 4th 0-0 away from home on the spin from the outset of the season. And do you know what? On this occasion, I don't think that would be the worst result. Now, finally, Ross Wilson has, of course, arrived as the sporting director during the international break, and all of the early noises, all of the vibes I'm getting back have been positive on this one. Now, you might say, well, of course they are. Well, no, it's not a case of that. Look at what happened with Paul Mitchell. There was no reporter more vociferous than myself during those early days, and it didn't do me any favours. It did cause me 1 or 2 issues with the club. It did cause me massive issues with Paul Mitchell himself. But when the noises were coming out within days, weeks of his arrival, of him rubbing up staff the wrong way, you just knew, certainly I knew, and folk on the inside knew, that it wasn't going to work. It was a mistake. It was misadventure. He should never really have been appointed, and they're still picking through the debris of some of that. Ross Wilson is inheriting some of that too. Eddie Howe, his coaching staff, players, others at the club. It was a mistake that should never have happened, but it did, and now it looks and it feels as if they've turned a corner. Now, we're not going to rewind and pick over everything of the Paul Mitchell but the reason I reported that and shone a light on it was, people sometimes come back at you and say, you're causing trouble there, you're picking fights. Ultimately, guys, it's shining a light, it's holding the club to account, it's holding individuals to account. That is only good for Newcastle United. What would you rather? You just turn a blind eye, everything's wonderful, you carry on? No, it's important as reporters and as journalists that you are aggressive in that reporting, and I was. And I think ultimately now it's served Newcastle well. Ross Wilson has arrived, and we'll judge him on what he does, absolutely down the line, but certainly in terms of what he said during those early days, a week now inside, and everything I've got back from that is good, it's positive. There seems to be collaboration there. That's the word I'm looking for, and that's the word everyone was looking for during the last year, because it wasn't there. Paul Mitchell came in, and I've said this, I don't think he wanted Eddie Howe as manager. I think over time that Paul Mitchell would have looked to bring in his own man. All the word I had and the suspicion there was that might have been Mauricio Pochettino, and wow, what would that have done for Newcastle United to lose Eddie Howe, but he's not. He's still here. And the question I asked of him this morning was, are you happier now, a year on? Given a year ago, the nature of the questions we were asking Eddie Howe was entirely different. There was friction there was tension. Now, Eddie said there's no point really going back over his steps over the past year. But yes, I'm happy. I like the structure that's in place. He says they've got strong leadership now, and there needs to be that collaboration, that collegiate approach, he said, to be progressive, to compete with other clubs. And he thinks now Newcastle have got that, and he's very confident and very reassured about what they can do and what they can achieve going forward. And of all the people at the football club, the one who needs to be happiest of most is the manager, because I've spoken about this at length previously. Eddie Howe is brilliant. Newcastle are lucky to have the manager and the coaching staff they do, and they've got to put everything in place to make sure he's got the working environment to thrive and be happy and to want to stay, because there have been spells over the last year when I personally have had my doubts about where it would be heading, given the structure wasn't right around him. It looks as if it is now, and that is good news for Newcastle United. Okay, guys, that's it for me for now. I won't be down at Brighton tomorrow, but I will be back on Monday from St James's Park, where I'll bring you my thoughts on Brighton and look ahead to that massive visit of Benfica. In the meantime, click on the link in the description below the line in my Newcastle Confidential column. News there of a very exciting England under 15 international dubbed the next John Stones, who should be coming in over the next couple of weeks as well, packed with information and news from inside the club there. So yeah, hit like, comment, subscribe. Tell me what 11 would you play down at Brighton tomorrow in the first game back after the international break. Loads to discuss as ever. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Bye-bye.